Now joining us, Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He's a Republican of Illinois. He's also a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us. I know you're in the U.S. Air Force Reserve still. You're still a pilot. So you have a personal stake, obviously, given the fact that you fought and you saw presumably some of your friends die in Afghanistan, come back in bad shape as well. What do you make of this new development that they're moving closer and closer and closer to this El Asad air base where there are a few hundred U.S. Marines and other U.S. military advisors?
You know, it's personally really tragic. It's frightening, obviously, because we have potentially troops in harm's way. They're going to be good. They'll be able to defend themselves. These soldiers and Marines are very good at what they do. But for me personally, I mean, I spent multiple tours there fighting hard to win the peace in Iraq. Many people fought even harder than I did. And to watch it fall apart is really tragic. I left in 2009, and I think the war was won, basically, in 2009. And I went back actually about 4 months ago up into the Kurdistan region, and just was tragic to see the whole thing fall apart. So,
because the central government in Baghdad, whether it was Nouri al-Maliki's government, and I know there's hope that the new government of Haider al-Abadi is going to be better. I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence. Have you?
There's hope, but we have to do a better job. The Iraqis have to do a better job of engaging the Sunnis. And this is the big issue. From what I've understand from people that have kind of been on the ground and talked to these Sunni tribesmen, they said there's no outreach, there's no attempt to engage them. And that's going to be the key to holding Iraq together and to liberating Iraq from ISIS is the Sunnis.
Here's what's so frustrating. The U.S. spent a decade training these Iraqi forces, Shiites, Sunni, Kurds. They were supposed to have a central military. Hundreds of thousands of troops were armed, trained, funded by the United States. The U.S. spent a decade there doing it. As soon as the United States pulled out, that entire effort collapsed. As soon as ISIS came in with a few thousand guys, they ran away from Mosul, a big city, nearly 2 million people. All that armor, all that equipment was left behind. These are the people the U.S. still thinks that the U.S. can train and get the job done because, you know, it was a total waste the first time around. Why try again?
Well, I think it's our only option between the Iraqi military and the Kurdish Peshmerga.
The Kurdish Peshmerga. They're
very good.
But they have no weapons, no serious weapons. The U.S. is still providing the weapons to the central regime in Baghdad. Some of it flows to the Kurds, but it's still a horrendous mess.
But not much. They've got maybe a dozen MRAPs, for instance, but they have a 800-mile border with ISIS. So a dozen MRAPs aren't going to do very much. I think we need to directly arm the Kurdish Peshmerga, lean on the Iraqi central government, and deal with it. This is what we're going to have to do.
Right now, those 400 Marines and other U.S. military advisors at this El Asad air base, near al-Baghdadi, if you will, this other place in the Anbar province. They're relying on their security on these Iraqi military forces.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty dangerous. If you have a friend or a loved one among those Americans at that base, you'd be pretty nervous right now.
Yeah, you'd be very nervous. Look, they probably have great units there guarding our Marines, and our Marines are very good at defending themselves as well, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of air cover if they come under attack. You know, it's a scary situation. I don't worry about the base being overrun because we're very good at what we do. But the bigger issue with the Iraqi military...
the base is under the... Excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah.
The base isn't the U.S. base. This is an Iraqi base.
Right.
And the Iraqis, as you know, as soon as they get threatened, they run away.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, with strong leadership, I don't think the Iraqi military will run away. Part of the problem is Maliki basically politicized the leadership of the military. And instead of the United States leaning on Maliki to make it a professional leadership, what happened is they get into contact with ISIS, all the leadership runs away, and every foot soldier is going to run away if you see your captain running away too. And so we saw an epic failure of the Iraqi military. Doesn't mean I have a whole lot of confidence in them, but I think it's our only option.
Remember, the Iraqi military largely Shiite. The Sunnis don't trust them at all, and you know almost half of Iraq is Sunnis right now. So let's get back to those 400 Marines and other U.S. troops at this air base, and ISIS is moving closer and closer and closer to them. If they have to fight, would you call them combat ground troops if they have to fight to defend themselves?
Absolutely.
Or would they just simply be advisors, if you will?
I think they'd be combat ground troops. I think they are combat troops, even if they're advising. I think we parse words too much on the idea of boots on the grounds or combat troops. Look, every Marine, every military person is trained to fight and may be called upon to do it. We hope that's not the case in this situation, but it very well may be. But I tell you, if there is an engagement with ISIS by our Marines, it'll be very one-sided in favor of the United States.
Yeah, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility the U.S. starts sending in planes to airlift those guys out of there as quickly as possible.
Very possible.
I have limited confidence in the Iraqi troops that are supposedly in charge of that air base. Let's see what happens. We have a lot more to talk about, Congressman. Stand by. We're taking a quick break. Much more on the breaking news right after this. We're back with the Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger as ISIS wages a major new military offensive in Iraq with U.S. troops clearly in the crosshairs. Congress, meanwhile, beginning a heated debate about the president's request for the new war powers legislation. Are you with the president on the language he submitted yesterday?
I don't like it. I don't like.
What don't you like about it?
What I don't like is a war powers resolution from the Congress's perspective should just give the president the authority to be commander-in-chief. What this resolution does, it vaguely talks about enduring offensive combat operations and that being prohibited. And it also puts a 3-year time limit on it. The 3-year time limit I disagree with, but that's not necessarily a deal killer. But the limit of what we're able or willing to do is my problem. Look, I'm not calling for large-scale American military combat operations. But what I am saying is when it comes to a cancer like ISIS, you can't say ISIS is bad unless it takes ground troops, in which case ground troops are worse.
But you know, a lot of liberal Democrats, they're not going to vote for legislation that doesn't have that kind of restriction. The restriction you hate.
Yeah, and herein lies the problem. And this is where the president has to be a leader. He has to say, look, I'm the commander-in-chief. I'm coming to Congress. This is what I need to prosecute the war and lead his own party. I don't have a lot of confidence in the president's ability to prosecute this war, to be honest with you. But I also realize there's only one commander-in-chief, and it's him. And the other thing is this authorization is going to go beyond President Obama to the next president of the United States as well, because unfortunately this war is not going to end within the next couple of years.
He's seeking this authorization, even though he says he really doesn't need it. He's got authorization from 2001, 2002. Those still remain in effect. He's just doing this because Congress asked him to submit some proposed legislation.
Well, and that's fine. And I actually agree with the president. I think he's operating under legitimate authorization today. But if you're going to come to the Congress and say, here's my proposal to operate, and I'm going to restrict myself even further, that's not something that I, and frankly, a lot of my colleagues can support. I want a piece of legislation I can vote for, but in the current draft, that's not it. Now, I know the committees are going to be having hearings, and we'll probably see a different piece of legislation.
So you think there could be a compromise, or this is dead?
I think in its current form, it's dead, but we can put out whatever authorization we want. And I think if there's an unrestricted one that allows the president to be commander-in-chief, that may be possible.
You might get the votes in the House, but probably not a lot of Democrats would go along with you, right?
Maybe not necessarily, but, you know, you'd be able to pick up 60 votes in the Senate probably, and the president would get the authorization he needs, even if it's Republicans.
If he signs that or whatever. You were in Yemen not that long ago on a fact-finding mission. It's turned out to be a disaster right now. The U.S. has been forced to abandon the embassy in the capital of Sana'a, military equipment, vehicles. They're now in the hands, presumably, of these Houthi Shiite rebels that have taken over. This is a real problem because this is the headquarters of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which represents a huge potential threat.
Well, this is a real embarrassment. I mean, out of our embassy, we were able to have a foothold and conduct these counter al-Qaeda operations. That's presumably gone now or defunct.
They say they can still do stuff even without an embassy. I guess if they launched drone strikes from neighboring countries in Oman or elsewhere.
Yeah, and where are we getting intelligence from on the ground? Who are we dealing with? There's no central government anymore. It's sad to see. And frankly, it's also sad because this is what the president held up as an example for why we're doing some of the operations we're doing and as a success. And it's not a success. It's tragic.
It's a disaster in Yemen, a disaster in Libya, despite those hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles, which the U.S. launched to get rid of Gaddafi. They're swimming at the U.S. Embassy pool in Libya right now. The rebels, Somalia, the U.S. Embassy was forced to shut down. Obviously, in Syria, there's no U.S. Embassy in Damascus. I see a pattern here, and you served in Iraq, you served in Afghanistan. I got to ask you this question. Was that a waste? Given what's going on right now, did the United States, the money, the blood, the treasure, all of that, was that simply a waste?
I don't think so. I mean, look, if we look back, I think probably many of us would have made a different decision in 2003 about Iraq. But we did what we did. I was there in 2009. We had brought Iraq peace. The surge had worked. It seems that political reconciliation was happening, and we pulled out all our forces in 2011 and pulled out, frankly, a lot of our engagement with Iraq, and it went in a bad way. So it's terrible to see what's happening now, but I would say that the sacrifice of many Americans has not been a waste in this war. We brought people peace. We showed them for a little bit what democracy can look like, and hopefully they take what it was like at one point and try to reinstate it.
Because in my view, the strategic winner in Iraq is not the United States, it's Iran. because that Shiite-led government in Baghdad is much, whether it's Nouri al-Maliki's government or Haider al-Abadi, the current prime minister, they seem to be much more concerned about having an alliance with their neighbors in Iran, the fellow Shiite regime, as opposed to the United States.
The strategic winner right now in all of the Middle East is Iran. In Yemen, we see it in Syria. The Iranian sphere of influence is encroaching all over the Middle East, and it really blows me away to see why is this administration not doing a better job of engaging. It seems they're so eager for a peace deal in Iran that they're allowing the Iran sphere of influence. This is going to come back to bite us.
So why is the U.S. supporting a government in Baghdad that seems to want to have this close alliance with Iran?
Well, I don't think we have a choice. This is probably the best of many bad options. But I think Iraq knows how to play the game. They play some Iranian influence, and they also want to balance with the United States. If we completely disengage with Iraq, not only will there be human tragedy and everything else, but we'll have basically total Iranian control of Iraq probably, and it's better for us to be there and at least be a counterbalance and work the longer-term issues once we get rid of
You
those.
agree the only really reliable Iraqis right now are the Kurds in the north?
That's the only reliable ones right now, unfortunately.
So maybe they should have their own little autonomous enclave. The U.S. can work with them because the rest of Iraq, it was a disaster. It is a disaster, presumably for the time being. It's going to be a disaster.
I think it'll be hard to see the Kurds going back into full partnership with the Iraqi government. There may be some autonomy, or maybe they'll push for independence at some point. But we've got the 50-meter target right now, and that's ISIS.
Yeah, meanwhile, ISIS right now threatening a bunch of Americans, 400 Americans, at that El Abadi air base. It's in the Anbar province. A lot of Americans lost their lives fighting for that Anbar province, as you well remember, whether in Fallujah or some other places. So,
and our prayers go out for them tonight.
Congressman